Well, welcome back to another episode of Parker's Pensées. This is a podcast where we explore thoughts in philosophy, theology, nature, and life. I love thinking about cool stuff, so come think with me. I'm smiling a little bit because I can see our guest twirling his mustache, which is great. Today, I have another special guest with me, Dr. Owen Anderson. He's a professor of philosophy and religion at Arizona State University. And today, we're going to be talking about dystopias. And so I'm pretty excited. Let's just pull him in here. Dr. Anderson, thanks so much for coming back on the podcast, man. You're becoming a regular. It's gonna be Owen's Pensées, man.
This is great. I can kind of be the sidekick.
Yeah, I love that's hilarious. That
you're Johnny Carson. I'm Eggman Man.
Yeah. Well, so what we wanted to talk about a little bit before we jump into dystopia too much is Utopia and how Utopia can only be had if everyone starts practicing jujitsu.
Yeah, that's right. That's what I wanted to find out about, because you'd mentioned that you're going to be in a tournament soon.
Yeah, hopefully. I don't know how good the tournament is or anything, but I started a month and a half ago. But I wrestled in college, so I got some.
I was going to say you have a pretty solid wrestling background, right?
Yeah, so I'm a white belt, but in any tournament, I'd have to compete as a blue belt.
Oh, because of your wrestling background?
Yeah, that's like a thing that they do. I guess wrestlers used to just run ship and they'd win money and stuff, and it's not fair.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. It's not just wrestling. It's other combat sports or something. There's a couple that you have to compete up.
Yeah, I can't wait to hear about it.
Yeah, so it'll be sweet.
Yeah, I'm in the Gracie University Combatives program.
Yeah,
which is I like a lot, because the first set you learn before you get to master cycle is street applicable stuff, directly applicable to the street.
Okay,
and they studied what are the main things people do on the street, and then they put together what are the 36 best jiu-jitsu responses to those.
Dang.
So you're set for a guy who maybe he's seen a jiu-jitsu video and he watches UFC, but that's it.
Right.
He thinks he knows, but he doesn't know anything. That's the best. And everyone else is less than that. So you're set for anyone like that, which is like 99% of the population.
Yeah. Dang, that's sweet. Yeah, that makes sense, because they always do those Gracie breakdowns. You can find those on YouTube all the time.
Yeah, that's what they are. Yeah. Those are a lot of fun to see those, and just what happens to the random person. And so it's a lot of fun. I really recommend it. And it has a lot of good analogies to what we do in philosophy.
Yes. Yeah, I found that too. So I started, I finally had some time to get into jiu-jitsu. I've been wanting to do it for a while, but I finally had some time to do it with the semester, lighter load. And I started chess as well. Actually studying chess. And it's a similar kind of thing. I mean, it's a trope that people talk about all the time, but it's a trope for a reason. It is. It's thinking a move ahead, trying to get someone to react this way, giving up something to get something.
That's what I love. That's what I love about jiu-jitsu is it's like physical chess.
Yeah, right.
So instead of just sitting in a chair and you're moving some pieces, like your whole body's involved, and you got to be anticipating this person 5 moves ahead, thinking what you can do right now. So yeah, I love that.
I like it too. Both disciplines there, both sports, whatever, if you want to call chess a sport, it's fun because it's so different. So like I could feel real good someday beating up on a white belt or something, and then I go and I play chess with someone and who I would beat up on, and they just destroy me mentally in chess. Like, dude, if we were playing a different thing right now. But no, and I learned to be a fool in new disciplines, because if you want to be good at something, you gotta first humble yourself and be a fool. Like, yeah. And so
that's a good one. I think that's what Joe Rogan said was jiu-jitsu is really good for guys because they need to be humbled, and you're going to tap 10,000 times. Yes, and it's just good for you to realize, I can't get out of this. I have to tap right now.
Yeah. There's something about that. Definitely. Yeah. That's awesome, man. So
there was an Onion skit, the comedy, The Onion, and they had one that was as if it was a sociological study. So it's talking like it's an official study, but it was about how men overestimate their fighting abilities by 4,000%. So how it would have guys talking about, if I ever got in a fight, I would just smash them with my elbow, and then if I have to, I'll break a bar stool over their head. And it was emphasizing something that's true, which is guys way overestimate how it'll go, and unless you do it, you don't realize how fast you'll get tired. I mean, you start throwing punches and swinging and flailing, and 30 seconds, you're done.
Yeah, and adrenaline's going. You've never done it before. Yeah. That's something, dude. You brought up Rogan. Him and Jocko Willink were talking, and they were saying maybe the solution to police brutality and stuff is to have all the police become purple belts.
Well, that's what Gracie University is suggesting. They've done a couple films where they'll show how a police situation could have been handled with jujitsu. Because the idea with jujitsu is you're able to keep everyone safe, including the guy you're wrestling.
Right.
So you get him into a position where he can't hurt himself or anyone around him.
Yeah. Well, and that was a big thing for me with jujitsu. So I like to wrestle. Wrestling does if it does transfer over into fighting, it transfers over into smashing the guy you're fighting and then punching. And I don't want to smash someone's face. I don't want to do that, you know.
Yeah,
and so
right.
a great thing about jujitsu is it is a combat sport, but like you said, you're controlling them.
Mhm.
And I saw this great video of Matt Serra once in a bar. This dude was really unruly.
Yeah.
And Matt
Yeah, I
Serra
saw that
puts him
one.
in a hold, right? And he's just like, hey, just chill out. We're just hanging out. And he wasn't mad. He was just hanging out because he knew that.
Yeah, and the guys around him, the waiters and stuff came up, right? And he's like, no, he's fine. I'm
It's
fine.
okay. We're
Everyone's
just
fine.
holding him. Yeah. I love that. That's great.
Yeah, I saw one like that. One of the Gracie breakdowns where it was a guy in a park who tried to kidnap someone.
Oh,
And another guy who knows he's actually a kickboxer, but he also knows jujitsu. So he used jujitsu and subdued the guy. But then other people at the park wanted to beat that guy up for trying to kidnap a kid.
yeah.
And so he was able to protect that guy and say, wait, I've got him. Just get the police here. Everyone's safe.
Man. Yeah, that's crazy. We need more people practicing some jujitsu there.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's what it is. That's what it means, right? The peaceful art.
Yeah. Oh, is that what that means?
Yeah.
And that's Japanese, probably.
Gentle
right?
art.
Yeah. Okay. Dang, that's sweet. Well, dude, I don't know how to make a transition here, but we can go back to the Utopia idea because we're going to be talking about dystopia, and I make the claim that we would be in a utopia if we all did jujitsu. Can you lay out like what does utopia mean before we get into dystopia?
Yeah, and I wonder about with just kind of your claim that it's a little bit silly. We'd be in a utopia, but there's something to that because if you do start to roll with someone, someone on the street. If they don't know what they're doing, that's what the combatives program's for.
Yeah.
And pretty quick, they're going to have about 30 seconds of energy. You just basically exhaust them and then submit them. But if they do know what they're doing and you start to realize, wow, this guy knows jujitsu, then you say, wait, why are we fighting? What gym do you go to? Right. Let's just go to the gym and roll together.
Yeah.
So, but utopia, it could have two meanings. It's ambiguous.
Mm-hmm.
It could mean the good place, the good country, or it could mean no place. And that could be for two reasons, right? It could be that there's no place like this.
Yeah.
So, I think you're right. We have to start there. What is a good society in order to know what would a bad one be? But we could go either direction, I guess, right? Because we have some gut intuitions about if society looks like this, it's not good.
Yeah.
So the opposite should be true.
Yeah.
But even then, people have some differing intuitions about that. Some people would rather have freedom and potential danger. Others would want protection and less freedom.
Right. Yeah. And at least from what I've inherited or received from my teaching on the fathers, our country's fathers, that we want the freedom and the risk.
Yeah.
And I'll take care of my family and I'll limit my risk by being a man of action myself.
You're all right. Because you have to give up some of your life to the person protecting you.
Yeah. Right.
Basically your money or something and say, look, you protect me and I'll give you more taxes or something.
Yeah. Yeah. And so again, like from how I've received the word utopia, it's always in a disparaging way. It's always, oh, it's not a utopia, man, or utopia. It's always using a negative. The guy just wants utopia or communism promises utopia, but doesn't ever. And I actually haven't heard it in a good way, except maybe Plato's Republic. Is that a utopia? And even then people disparage that as well.
Yeah. And you and I talked about this one last time. So it's good for a continuity from our discussion.
Yeah.
And I just like to put a plug in because I just gave a talk at Arizona State. I'm a professor at Arizona State University. And on Tuesday night, so 2 days ago, I gave a talk on free speech. I titled it Free Speech and the Logos. Mm-hmm. And if you go to my YouTube page, Dr. Owen Anderson, you'll see that title right there. It's probably the first video because I just put it up. Nice. Free speech and the logos. Okay. So that's one of the things people might want in a good society. What counts as a good society? What Plato's doing in the Republic is he wants to know what is a good soul. And he says, in order to figure that out, it's like as if we project the soul writ large into a city. Mm-hmm. And what would a good city be? And then we'll know what a good soul would be.
Yeah.
So I think there's something to that, which is we need to know what the good is in order to make these kinds of assessments. Like is this a good city? Is this a good place or not?
Yeah.
And I think people don't even do that. That's why they stumble so quickly. People just jump right in. They don't have a good definition of the good, and that'll trip you up right away.
Yeah. Well, so you're big into like looking at the natural law kind of stuff, and so I wonder. Some people might think that we're talking like subjectivism kind of stuff. One man's utopia is another man's dystopia. Are you saying there's an objective good and objective good society that would be ordered towards that good, right? Like there's actually
Right.
a picture that we can have. Do we how do we come by that? So we talked about the need for looking at those criteria and stuff. How do we adjudicate between rival
Well, it's good
conceptions of the good?
because this will get us into especially 1984,
Yeah.
because the idea is the good is based on human nature. Something's good for a thing according to its nature.
Okay.
So what's good for a rabbit is not the same as what's good for a giraffe
Yeah.
or a horse. So to know what is good for a human, you'd have to know what is a human, right? Good for a human, not a computer.
Yeah.
So yeah, you'd have to know human nature, which is an objective thing.
Mhm.
You discover human nature, you figure it out. It's not something that you create. And I have some quotes for you when we get to 1984 about that exact point. And that's really, for us, we might start to think about the Garden of Eden and the temptation from the serpent.
Mhm.
Because that's what I think the temptation is. You put yourself in the place of God and you decide what's good and evil for yourself.
Yeah.
Instead of God made you with a nature, and what's good for you is dependent on that nature. Right. So
Well,
we'll see that theme throughout each of these books we're going to talk about today, which is, can humans make their own natures? Can they
that's great.
recreate them to make a perfect place? And so I think you're right. When people say utopia, the place they describe, usually when I hear about it, I think, man, I would hate to live there.
Mhm.
I mean, let me give a couple examples. I think our friends Sam and Dean Winchester ended up in heaven. But here's what their heaven is. They're with their family forever. Are you sure that's heaven? I mean, you could take your family maybe for like a barbecue, your extended family, right? Can you imagine you can't get away from them forever? That doesn't sound like heaven. I think that they might be doing a good place on Sam and Dean, right? And there's been a switch in there.
Yeah.
Or think about like the place Star Trek ends up. Like Earth is utopia by the time we come into the Star Trek story.
Mhm.
We've solved all of our fights, and now we're moving on. We have fights with other planets, but our fights on Earth are done. Yeah. But it seems kind of boring. That's why you'd want to go on the Enterprise, is you'd want adventure.
Yeah.
And Earth seems like kind of pathetic at that point. Like, what would you do with yourself? Mm-hmm. Now, I'm not saying you have to have like fights to have good things happen, but because it's a secular universe, purely material, that's all you have. There's no really depth of meaning to your life. And we're going to encounter that one in Brave New World. So we'll come to that.
Yeah. Okay.
So yeah, you're right. These aren't good descriptions of the utopia. I think what's happening is what we're trying to describe really is the city of God.
Yeah. I think you're right. So, well, in that sense, though, would you characterize the Garden of Eden as a utopia prior to the fall?
The Garden of Eden in that stage is like probation. So you're supposed to have dominion, filling the earth and multiplying. Yeah. So the Garden of Eden is not the end of it. That's why the scriptures end with a city, which is the completed act of human dominion. Yeah. Beginning a garden, no dominion, no evil at that point either. And then human dominion throughout history, culminating in the city of God. Yeah.
That's really good. Yeah, I would just imagine someone bringing that point up. Oftentimes, I hear pastors use that same depiction you just gave to argue for like living in the city and not giving up on the city. That the Bible ends with the city, and I always like I hate the city. I live close to Chicago. I hate it. I like it and I hate it. Right, but when you have to drive in.
So the city, I don't know if that'll work because the city of God is contrasted with Babylon, the blank.
Exactly, man.
So I don't know if
it's exactly right. So
it can get really bad in the city when it's given to unbelief.
Yes, exactly. And I love Chicago and I hate Chicago, but I think I can still hate Chicago because it's not the city of God, right? Like in some sense, I should hate parts of the city.
Well, remember that's the very first thing Cain did, was he wanted to build a city for himself, and Nimrod wanted to build a city for himself, and then in the secular ones, Gilgamesh wanted to build a city for himself. So there's a sense of I'll build a city, name it Andersonville, and I'll make a great name for myself. These
Yeah.
are the men of renown that Genesis 6 talks about.
Yeah.
And that's a kind of attempt to get to immortality, but you're building a city under man's law, which is going to be a nightmare.
Yeah.
And that's what these books are about.
Yeah, definitely. Well, dude, on that note, that's a great segue. Which one do you want to start with? We got three that we want to look at today: That Hideous Strength by C.S. Lewis, Brave New World by Aldous Huxley, and 1984 by George Orwell. I'll let you lead the way here.
So here we have 1984, Big Brother Watching You, my copy, and then That Hideous Strength.
Oh yeah.
And then I was telling you as you and I were getting ready that I had Brave New World. Actually, I think it's that copy, and can't find it. I had it out for our purpose, and I don't know where, which stack of books it got put into. So I have these. So let's start with 1984 as the framework.
Yeah. And so interestingly, this book was written in 1947. I think it was published in 1948. So it's like a reverse 1948, and this is what it'll look like in 1984.
Well, and that's maybe we comment on all three of them. Think about what all three of these are, right?
Yeah.
All three of these are written at roughly the same time period, mid 20th century.
Yeah.
They're all about the same kind of thing. And so we have three different authors who are different worldviews.
Yeah.
We'll touch on that a little bit.
Yeah.
But they have similar views of what a bad society would look like, what a dystopia would look like. And interestingly, they have, I think, the same answer, even though C.S. Lewis especially is a particularly Christian attempt. Mm-hmm. All three of them have the same mid-20th century answer to the problem, and I'm going to suggest it was insufficient.
Yeah, okay.
So 1984, let me pull up a few quotes I've got. So we have a point where the government is in control of all information and can watch you. What's interesting is when he wrote this, that was high-tech stuff way in the future. 1984, we know in 1984 we didn't have the technology yet, but now you could easily have a Nest camera in every corner of your house, on your phone, walking around and seeing what's going on.
Laptops right here,
Yeah, they're probably watching us right now through our feed.
Yeah.
So it gets to the idea of control through information. And it's not just preventing crimes, it's even preventing thought crimes.
Yeah.
So you'll have thought police. Let me give you a couple quotes. It says, power is tearing human minds into pieces and putting them together again in new shapes of your own choosing. So you can take apart the human and reconfigure them however you want. I think that idea is getting to the temptation with the serpent. You can be whatever you want. You can be your own God.
Yeah.
Or the state can be its own God.
Yeah.
Not living under the law of God, living under the law of man.
Mm-hmm.
And think about the ways that we do that now, the ways we tell people they can redefine themselves.
Yeah.
He says this, don't you see that the whole aim of Newspeak is to narrow the range of thought? In the end, we shall make thought crime literally impossible because there will be no words in which to express it. Mm-hmm. So the goal is like further than Minority Report, where you're seeing the future to stop a crime.
Yeah.
You want to stop outward crimes, but you also want to stop inward thought crimes, like thinking I don't like the government. That's a thought crime in this story. And not just being able to see into someone's mind, but taking away the words that they would use to do that. So not even able to have those thoughts.
Yeah, I think that's so interesting because he's playing on the connection between words and concepts and how we develop our concepts through this process of using words and thinking and interaction with each other. And so if you don't have the words, depending on what you think about concepts, some are probably really a priori, but some are a posteriori, and they takes us talking with people to form these concepts. And so if you don't have the words,
to have dominion.
Yeah. And so if you don't have these words, you can't form the concept. And so they're controlling, they're preventing future insurrections or thought crimes by changing the words so that you don't even have the concepts aren't able to be formed.
Well, you can see this in some societies that have been under oppression, both pre-modern and modern, where you'll see studies done with the citizens, and it doesn't even occur to people
Yes.
that they could rebel.
Right.
This is just how life is. This is what it's like.
Yeah.
You're born, live, and die.
Mhm.
And so there's no sense of progress and dominion over the natural world, or I mean, so we were talking about the temptation in the garden, because I think that's going to be the heart of each of these, the temptation to put yourself in the place of God. But think about what Adam was doing just before that in chapter 2. He was naming the creation.
Yes. Right.
And I take that to be not like Spot, Fido,
Right.
Rover,
Yeah.
but the kinds of things, like a horse is different than a rabbit.
Yeah.
And there's different kinds of things that your mind is discovering in the world. And it's because he did that then he could see none of these is a sufficient helper for me.
Right. Exactly.
Because
God
none of them can do that with me. A dog can be my best friend, but he can't have dominion with me.
Right. Right.
So he had just shown that he can know the nature of things. And then the very next test, do you know your nature? Do you think you could be God? And they failed that one, obviously. So I think that's going to be the temptation here. Humans putting themselves in the place of God, whether it's Cain building a city or Nimrod building a city, Babylon, the city of man.
Yeah. There's so I have some of my favorite quotes from this are towards the end, and it reminds me. I always had C.S. Lewis in mind when I was reading this, and what Lewis called the poison of subjectivism, that we're turning to the self, and it's similar to what you said earlier, that we're turning to the subjective self and saying I'll construct reality, or socially we're turning to ourselves and saying we'll construct reality. And so on page 325 in mine, the dude from the party, I always forget his name, but he's talking to the main character, Winston. O'Brien is talking to Winston, and he says, you would not make the act of submission, which is the price of sanity. So he's saying you have to submit to the state if you want to be sane. You prefer to be a lunatic, a minority of one. Only the disciplined mind can see reality, Winston. You believe that reality is something objective, external, existing in its own right. You also believe that the nature of reality is self-evident. When you delude yourself into thinking that you see something, you assume that everyone else sees the same thing as you. But I tell you, Winston, that reality is not external. Reality exists in the human mind and nowhere else, not in the individual mind, which can make mistakes, and in any case, soon perishes, only in the mind of the party, which is collective and immortal. Whatever the party holds to be truth is truth.
Yeah. I have one from around that same time that you and I both picked up on it. And it says, not merely the validity of experience, but the very existence of external reality was tacitly denied by their philosophy. So yeah, that's right. So Adam is interacting, using him as the type of man.
Yeah.
Adam, man. He's interacting with external reality in naming the creatures. And then he's tested on, can you be God? And so, yeah, once we have denied that there is anything real outside of our minds, now this version is collectivism, but there's also an individualist version. Right. And there'd be two sides of the same incorrect coin. So the individualist one that might have been more popular in the West is more like the consumerism model, where you've got money and time and you should spend it on whatever makes you happy.
Yeah.
In a way, that's what we'll see more. It's more like what we see in Brave New World.
Yeah. Okay. This book was the first time I saw Metaphysician, which was great. It kind of put me on to metaphysics, actually. So O'Brien is talking to Winston, and Winston's trying to figure this stuff out. He's trying to reason for himself. He's trying to think through, no, you can't, this can't be right. And then O'Brien goes, you are no metaphysician, Winston. And then he goes on this, sophistry line of thought, where he's trying to break down his concept. He's trying to break down his idea of truth outside of the party. Yeah. And so they're using this subjective term, collectivism, in order to break down our sense of self, our sense of truth, our sense of reason, and objective reality. Is that is that possible? Do you think the human mind is capable of? You talked about people under regimes like this. Is it possible to ever actually truly stamp out our idea of objective truth?
Well, that means there's some people who would not even have that idea. You have to explain them what truth means. Like, I'll hear people use the word truth, and I know they mean something more like how I feel right now.
Yeah.
Well, I'm reading this book also. Herbert Marcuse,
Yeah.
Negations.
Mhm.
And that's one of the founders of the
Critical theory.
critical theory in the States. And that's a lot of what he's working on, is how you can, the first one I read, you can break things back down and build them up as you'd please.
Mhm.
There is no being.
Right.
There is just beings.
Yeah.
So in one way, we might think this is really simple to prove. They're saying something's true while denying truth. It's kind of a self-referential absurdity.
Yeah.
But I think we're going to have to do a little more work than that. I think that there's something more going on here, which is deeply embedded in a number of the world's philosophies, and ultimately goes back to you can be your own God.
Yeah.
Denying the difference between humans and God. And the you might be the individual, or it might mean the collective humans.
Yeah.
You can replace God.
Mm-hmm. And
so yeah, I have another one like that.
If you do, you get to build yourself up however you want.
Yeah, I mean, that's one way to understand the Tower of Babel, right?
Yeah.
Building a tower to the heavens could both be dedicated to the heavens and also the distance, building it up high.
Yeah. I'll reach up there. Yeah.
Probably, if there's another flood, we'll survive it because we've built a tower like this.
Okay.
So we can overcome whatever God wants to throw at us. We can overcome it.
Mm.
And it says this one, every record has been destroyed or falsified. Every book rewritten. Every picture has been repainted. Every statue and street building has been renamed. Does that sound familiar?
Yeah.
They get rid of the statues and rename them. Every date has been altered. And the process is continuing day by day and minute by minute. History has stopped. Nothing exists except an endless present in which the party is always right.
Yeah.
That's what this is getting to, the idea of the negation of being. There is no being. And so there aren't distinctions. That's the end of reason, because by reason we make distinctions. We say A and non-A, and it's not both A and non-A. And so when you come across those who want to argue against reason, I think you and I talked about dialetheism and was that you and I and Graham Priest?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, he's following the Buddhist philosopher Nagarjuna, and Nagarjuna denies there's being.
Yeah,
and so it's not surprising. Yeah, once you do that, those are like your two options: reason or negation of all things.
Yeah,
and I think that gets us to the Word itself in John chapter 1. Mm-hmm. The Word is that which makes God known.
Yeah, and
God is God. God's not the creation.
Mm-hmm.
But in idolatry, people want to say the creation could be our God, or I could be my own God.
Right.
Any way I want it, that's the way I need it.
Yeah. So 1984 is like one of the most famous dystopian novels, because it's, I think he's got a quote, I think it's in here, but it's like, if you want to see the future of humanity, imagine a boot on a human face forever. And it's just like this party rule, because you've turned to subjectivism and neglected or denied objective natures and objective reality, the existence of God, then you get to mold yourself into whoever you want. But turns out the strong man comes along, or the strong man, oligarchy, whoever, and they have their own view of reality, and they're going to put their boot on your face, and they're going to reshape things through power.
Yeah. Well, that's the will to power, right? That's
right.
Nietzsche coming down to us in Foucault and Marcuse. They're popularizing that idea. Let me read one more. It says, and if all others accepted the lie which the party imposed, if all records told the same tale, then the lie passed into history and became truth. Who controls the past, the party slogan, controls the future. Who controls the present controls the past. So you'll have this idea, right? Whoever the winners write the history.
Yeah.
So whoever's alive right now writes what the past was about, which then shapes the future. Now, it's too easy to make direct comparisons to where we're at now, and anybody from either side of the political aisle could say the other guys, my opponents, are 1984. Yep. But it's hard right now because of some of what we've been going through not to draw some comparisons.
Right.
And so I'll leave it up to everyone watching. I won't make them myself, but yeah, the control of information and deciding what you can talk about and how you can talk about it. And if you use words that are deemed as unacceptable words, then the thought police come in and tell you stop thinking that way, and they'll reprogram. I think there was a couple of elected politicians who called for reprogramming of their political opponents just this month.
Yeah.
Those political, and I was reading this to get ready for our talk when they said that publicly, and I'm just thinking to myself, And in fact, let me read that one to you. That's another quote I have here. And it read like it was straight out of the New York Times, not out of George Orwell. Yeah. And no one seemed in the New York Times to say, hey, wait a minute, maybe we shouldn't speak that way.
Yeah.
So yeah, when Winston is interacting with O'Brien and going to be sent to room 101, he says, "What is in room 101?" And O'Brien says, "You know what's in room 101. Everyone knows what's in room 101. That's where you're reprogrammed." Mm-hmm. And so then he says, there are 3 stages to your reintegration. There's learning, there's understanding, and there's acceptance. And you're at stage 2. And that's when this quote came out where this person was like, yeah, these people need to be reintegrated and re-educated. And I'm like, what? We're in room 101 in real life now?
Yeah. Dude, that's so terrifying. That whole idea is so terrifying because you know what's in, and it's like, it's your worst fear. And they're going to put a cage in your face and there's a hungry rat's going to run in your face. And yeah, and you will say whatever, you'll think whatever, you'll try to see whatever because this rat's coming at your face.
Yeah.
And just that idea of playing on your biggest fears and then trying to re-educate you. Something that's different for me, I don't want to make I'm with you. I don't want to draw a ton of the conclusions for our listeners, but I always thought it would come by force. You know, I'm not saying that we're in a totally totalitarian regime or anything, but when the Bible says that people call good evil and evil good, I thought they would straight up say, hey, you're good, what you believe is good, and I don't like good things, so screw you. Right. But really, it's a twisting around, and they say, what you think is good is evil and wicked, and you're a bigot and a sexist homophobe, and you're bad. And it's like, that's not fair. What the heck? Dang it.
Yeah, that you and I talked about, I think, in our first interview, that no one can knowingly do evil. So there's no one who goes on and says, well, Parker knows the truth, but I don't like the truth, so I'm going to believe something else. Right? What they think what they believe is true, and that what you think is false. And they think their life, what they're doing are good things, and what you're doing aren't good things. So they suppress the truth with a lie, but they themselves aren't thinking that.
Yeah. Do you think so? Sometimes we like to think of like figures of pure evil. We think of Hitler, or we think of Stalin. Stalin to me maybe more than Hitler, because Hitler seems insane, but Stalin seems like he was intentionally trying to do evil. Would you say no? He had a warped view. Like, yeah, he's still culpable and stuff like that, right? But
yeah, he believed you could bring about a society. Let's just pick a number where 1 billion people are happy, but on the way 100 million have to suffer.
Yeah.
Well, as a Marxist utilitarian, then that makes sense.
Can someone be just a radical egoist and just saying, I don't, just me is happy?
My great, but I don't think that's it. I think we oversimplify those guys. Okay. And we say, he must have just been a radical egoist. No, you need to look into his philosophy. That's what I have a great books reading group. Anyone who's listening is free to join us because we do it live online. And this is our book. One of our books this spring is Solzhenitsyn's One Day in the Life of Ivan Denisovich. So this is fictional, but it's really about what happened to Solzhenitsyn, who was in the Russian army, but he said something negative about Stalin and was sent to Siberian work camp.
The Gulag, right? Yeah. And that's the archipelago that he wrote?
Yeah, that's another book of his, right? So that I was going to mention that as like a real life dystopia. You don't have to go to fiction to read about it.
Yeah, seriously.
But how do they justify? Because we might take the easy way out and say, oh, in fact, I think that's what we do, for example, in Lord of the Rings. A lot of the orcs are kind of painted. First off, they're very ugly. They have bad dental work. They slobber, and they cut down trees. So they're bad guys.
Right.
But in reality, they're pretty industrious, and they seem to be good team players. They put the team over themselves, and they're building things. What have the elves done lately? They seem to be just coasting off the ruins of a failed civilization.
Yeah.
Where the orcs are up and coming. So we might paint our enemies really easily as, oh, they're just wicked and they're evil and they're stupid and they believe what they're doing is wrong, but they just don't have the willpower not to do it.
Yeah. When really they're believing a false story. If they are wrong, they're
so you should be able to take the time to get in there and show how whatever narrative they're telling themselves isn't true, and it's culpably not true. You should have known that.
Yeah. That's good. Okay, so we got 1984 here, and there's always memes about how we should move it into from nonfiction or from fiction to
Yeah.
nonfiction, right? And that's funny and it's terrifyingly true and scary. But um, do you want to stick with this, or should we move on to the next one?
Well, let me read a quote from it, which is going to begin to give us how all three of these have a similar solution, and then
Yeah.
I'll build a case that it's not a sufficient solution. So he says, "Never again will you be capable of ordinary human feeling. Everything will be dead inside you. Never again will you be capable of love or friendship or joy in living or laughter or curiosity or courage or integrity. You'll be hollow. We shall squeeze you empty, and then we shall fill you with ourselves." So that sounds terrible, right? But I'll come back to but you can find a very similar quote in each of the other two. Brave New World, when he's talking with Mustafa Munz, his response to Mustafa Munz is just almost like a paraphrase of this. And Lewis, I mean, this sounds just like the abolition of man.
Yeah.
You see, then this is supposed to be the fictional abolition of man, like the abolition of man in a story form.
Yeah. So and before that, I got into Lewis like super hard the last couple of years. But he started with this essay, Poison of Subjectivism. Usually starts with an essay, then he writes a book. So then he wrote Abolition of Man, and then he had this turn to narrative and was like, all right, here we go. Here's a narrative form of it. And I really like that he did his strength. I can't wait to talk about that. But yeah, so that's the solution. Do you want to critique the solution later, or
Yeah, we can see how it comes out in each of them. Each of these things is part of human nature. So what I said was it's not sufficient. I didn't say that this isn't necessary as part of the solution, but it's not going to get us. It's not going to get us all the way where we need to go. So yeah, each of these things you're going to have to deny human nature is another way I would say it. And I think that would more accurately capture it. But what I guess here's what I would say: this is a non-cognitivist solution. So the things that are mentioned here are feelings of various kinds. Joy, capable of love in terms of the feelings of romantic relationship. You'll feel dead inside. You'll feel hollow. You don't have courage, which is like, this is the kind of a virtue soul-making solution to the problem of evil. You need suffering in your life. Mm-hmm. And this comes out real clearly in Brave New World. You need suffering to demonstrate virtues, to be a good person.
Yeah.
So in contrast, what I would say is that doesn't show that the other view is false, though. It might be that truth leads to this kind of outcome. Yeah. What you need to do is get in and show how O'Brien and the party are wrong. Mm-hmm. They seem to be a kind of material monist system.
Yeah.
So can Winston give a proof that the soul exists, that we're not just bodies? And this is not a proof to say, well, you won't laugh. If you had a soul, you'd laugh. No, come on. You could program a robot to laugh.
Yeah, right.
So yeah, how would Winston do? So in other words, the party doesn't know, Winston doesn't know, and he doesn't advance the cause at all of knowing. He just doesn't like the outcome.
Yeah.
So in one way, you have a struggle now between materialist skeptics and fideists. And the fideist one might look more attractive to us, but that's just really because of our own Christian background. Someone else with a different background might say, no, I actually like the materialist skeptic side. They're really efficient. Yeah. So we're going to need more than that. But all three of these guys in the mid-20th century do that same sort of solution.
So what is Orwell saying? Does Orwell give us a prescription for what to do here? It doesn't even, to me, everyone always says it's a cautionary tale. I think Orwell is just a good writer and he's writing about what he sees. Do you think is he intentionally writing this and saying, avoid this and here's how to avoid that?
Right. No. So all three of the ones we're looking at today are novels, which means a couple things. When I come to a novel, it means this: the author's intention doesn't matter. It's a work of art.
Okay.
So it has its own life once it comes out of the author's mind, and it either describes reality and we say, wow, this is masterful, or it doesn't.
Okay. But
knowing the author's intention doesn't help one way or the other. A lot of times the authors don't understand their own work. That's what Socrates found, remember, in the Apology?
Yeah. So,
and then second, it is describing, not prescribing. You're right. So literature is just describing something. So you're right. I don't think he's giving us like a how-to manual of how to avoid 1984. Nevertheless, the characters, I'm talking here now about
Yeah.
Winston, not
Okay.
George Orwell.
Okay.
Winston doesn't have an answer.
Yeah.
And
That's
because
right.
of that, he ultimately fails himself.
Yeah. Yeah. And he ends up becoming neutered. Like by the end of the book,
I
he's
think
this.
I think Leonidas probably has more rational argument than Winston, and he'd be able to withstand that. He'd say, "Yeah, go ahead,
Hmm.
come and get it."
Yeah.
Right?
That's so epic, dude. I love that.
Yeah. So in
Gosh.
other words, why does Winston break and Leonidas wouldn't? Is it just the willpower? No, I think that there's some. I think Leonidas has willpower because he has a good argument about why what he's doing is the right thing to do.
We've talked about that before too, about if you don't have sufficient answers or answers that suit you well, it
Mhm.
starts to erode your will over time.
Mhm. Yeah. It'll break down eventually, and they'll figure out what it is. Willpower only lasts. It's like you're holding a medium heavy bar. Can't see it like this. You can do that for a while, and slowly your arms start to shake, and they start to go down a little bit, and you're done.
Yeah.
So it's like that. The pressure on you eventually breaks. So you don't have knowledge. That's why Plato and Socrates said knowledge is permanent, immovable. If you had it, you won't lose it. And if you lose what you had, it means you didn't really know.
Yeah.
So I
Okay.
don't think we find a character who knows here. We're finding in the mid 20th century fideists and skeptics. The skeptics tend to be in the Soviet sphere, and the fideists tend to be in the West. But because the West only had fideism, look at where we're at now.
Yeah.
We didn't have knowledge. We
Yeah.
lost what we had, which means we didn't have knowledge, to use that Plato formula.
That's good. So Orwell's got this famous line, "All art is propaganda," and it's interesting because it's like, well, what was your propaganda? Because he thought that, right? And there's a famous collection of his essays called "All Art is Propaganda," and this is a work of art, and he's just kind of owning that. I need to bone up on that essay again, but I don't know what he's like. You said it's a work of art and it's open to interpretation. I don't know what his goal was. Like, do you know what his intention in writing this was? Do you think it was just to write a
Well, I
scary book?
suspect he has in mind what's going to happen with the Soviets, and he has in mind some of the people, maybe the same kinds of people that Lewis has in mind
Yeah.
in
Okay.
England.
It's part of the air that they're breathing because there's a reason
Yeah,
these novels are coming out. Huxley's in like early 30s maybe, but both Lewis's book is I think a year before
yeah,
1984 came out, so like 46 or something like that. So there's something that's leading these guys to write these books.
yeah, yeah. And what is it?
Mhm.
There's something in the air, I guess, and also their answers. In this way, you could say they're all persons of their time,
Yeah.
and their answers reflect that. Now, I know we love Lewis, and in your audience, probably people are Lewis, and I already took a little bit of a shot at Tolkien. So I've lost some of my social capital,
Yeah.
and I'll have to be careful not to take too many shots. But we could say, yeah, Lewis's answers are very indicative of when he lived. And using the Plato formula, if we got knowledge, then we would have maintained it in the face of these trials, these challenges, and we haven't. And I think we haven't in the same way Israel under the kings didn't. It isn't just that we had it and we didn't keep it, it's that we replaced it with something else. We brought Asherah and Baal into the sanctuary. And so that needs to be identified and repented of.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. So
And that's
we
more
got
than just you don't have feelings, you'll be hollow.
yeah.
Show that material philosophy is false. Show there's more than matter. Show that matter hasn't existed from eternity.
That and the scary part of 1984 for me is when O'Brien's talking about who owns the present, owns the past, and I know like there's objective truth, I believe in that, but when you do have this kind of totalitarian control and you can disappear people, you think of the Soviet Union, USSR, they're erasing pictures of people, which is they're always hilarious to look at because they miss a hand. There's a
Mhm.
floating hand or something like that, but they can control history and they can control what you believe. Should Winston have made an argument about objective truth there? You think, or
Yeah, or reason is actually, I think, if you have to give a little paragraph, like the one I read, you won't have any feelings. You can attempt to erase these things, but ultimately it's John chapter 1, verse 5.
Yeah.
The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness comprehends it not. Mm-hmm. You can't erase the word, the logos. Yeah. And so in that talk I mentioned that I gave this week on free speech and the logos, I gave 2 examples. Socrates, who I said was a good partial example. What he gets us is this: you shouldn't claim to know when you don't know.
Yeah.
And the reason why I'm superior, in one sense, he would say the wisest, is because I at least know when I don't know. But then I said, that's not really going far enough. And I went to Acts 7 and Stephen, because Stephen takes it a step further. Not only do you think you know when you don't know, you should have known.
Yeah.
And because you didn't know, your forefathers killed the prophets, and now you've killed the promised one. Mm-hmm. And so that's a lot more cutting to where we're at. It's not just that O'Brien's wrong and he makes us feel hollow inside. It's that he's culpably ignorant and working against the word of God in a broad sense, not limited to the Bible, but all that by which God is known, general revelation and the providence of God. You're trying to erase that. Good luck, so to speak, right? You're not going to be able to do it.
Yeah.
Now, that's why I think Stephen's execution is so much more violent than Socrates. The Greeks could be violent and passionate if they wanted to. So it's not like a difference in the groups. It's that you either, after being told that, you have 2 options: confess it, repent, or silence the person who's saying that. So I think that'll be closer to it. Can we show by reason the logos? Logos, I know philosophy circles tend to say logos. Yeah. Can we show by reason that these guys are wrong, that the very foundation of their city is ruined?
Yeah.
And think about how the foundation of the city of God's described in Revelation. That's a solid foundation of these stones that it's built on, 12 layers. So there's a symbolism there, but the idea you're getting across is this foundation is not going anywhere.
Yeah.
Now, this is where I think probably of the 3 books, and you'll be mad at me, the best one is Brave New World. Okay. And the reason for that is why they're doing what they're doing. I know in the book, Amusing Ourselves to Death, the author, this is from the 80s, but the author said, the Brave New World is more like our situation in America.
Right.
So the idea there is a similar kind of control, but they do it by helping you be happy. Mm-hmm. So they take away suffering as much as they can. Yep. Old age and sickness are removed. You don't have to be around death. They also organize the kinds of people so that you're content with your lot in life. Like you'll be made just smart enough to do what you're supposed to do, but not smart enough because they're doing eugenics. Yeah, right. Not smart enough to become discontent.
You that way, yeah.
And anything that's left over that they can't get rid of, they have something called soma, which is a drug. Soma is the first drug from the Hindu Vedas, and people have tried to recreate it. And Timothy Leary was trying to do that when he developed LSD.
I didn't know that. Okay, that makes sense.
As I understand it, that's something that Aldous Huxley used.
Huh.
So, but to think of the timeline there, I think that overlaps, or if it was a different drug, but he was involved in drug use to overcome these things. To actually, Aldous Huxley has a book, The Doors of Perception. You open the doors of the perception of your mind with these drugs. And a UCLA philosophy student read that book and dropped out of the philosophy program and started a band. Do you know what he named his band?
No.
The band is inspired by the book, The Doors of Perception. What do you think the band is?
The Doors?
The Doors. And he became much more well-known as a rocker than he ever would have as a philosophy student.
I know that story.
He named it after Aldous Huxley's book, The Doors of Perception. Wow. You open those through psychedelic rock. That's what the Doors rock is, right?
Yeah.
So you hear that, you see a TV screen with swirling colors, you have Jim Morrison playing in the background, you have some LSD, and you're seeing new dimensions of reality no one's ever seen before.
Yeah, and that that whole movement, man, it's back. Like it's back through DMT is the new one, right? This is the God drug. We'll take some
Really?
DMT or we'll take mushrooms and we'll have the spiritual experience. And
Hmm.
that's really what Christianity is. Like you hear it on Joe Rogan all the time. He's got guys on, and this is what the Christians were doing. This is really, the burning bush had DMT in it, and
Yeah,
that's why
even
Moses.
all right. Well, here's the thing. That's the best line from Brave New World. Soma is Christianity without tears.
Mm,
So Christianity, according to their understanding of Christianity, you want to get to ecstasy,
yeah.
but you have to go through agony first.
Is that
We'll
is
give you ecstasy without the agony.
is that view based on like the beatific vision? Is that what they're thinking? That
Something like
Christianity
that,
just
yeah.
static?
Like that. So again, we're going to see, just like with 1984, a non-cognitive description of the highest good.
Yeah, that's good. That's good.
Experience.
Yeah.
And you know what? We can give you the same experience with chemicals.
Yeah.
So there's this whole discussion, and Mustafa Mons is talking about how they've done away with the need for God. That's why we don't need God anymore. It's not that God doesn't exist, he says. It's that we don't need him. There's no argument back. The response back is the same kind of things we just read in 1984. Well, you don't have opportunities to be courageous or show virtues. Suffering is needed sometimes to make life more exciting. Human feelings, like, well,
Yeah.
that's not
Don't
an
need.
argument to show we need God.
Right.
So again, we have skepticism doing its thing and building a city based on skepticism, and then we have the fideists saying that the skeptics are wrong, but not having a case for it.
Yeah.
Now, I think both the characters would appeal to us because we don't want to live in that kind of place. But that only says something about our own background.
Yeah.
We're like the authors of these books. We have a similar background as they do. And someone else might say, "No, a Soma society sounds great. Where is that at? Where's the directions? Can you send me the Apple map?"
Yeah. One of the I almost didn't read this book. I read it a few years back. I don't know, 5, 6, 7 years, and I almost put it down because the beginning of it's so rough, where they're talking about like the orgies and like little kids fooling around with each other, and it was just so rough. And it was just like, dude, this one does hit a chord with me in this culture where 1984 is like, okay, don't do this, don't give too much power to the
Yeah,
politicians. You read this and you're like, oh, we've been doing this. We've been
yeah.
doing this.
The stuff about sex is to show the dehumanizing aspect of this behavior.
Yeah.
Because that's one thing that's very intimate. It's the most intimate thing anyone can do.
Yeah.
If you can dehumanize that, there's everything else is easy to dehumanize after that.
Right.
I think Lenin had a line where he said, "This is the Soviet Lenin, not the English communist."
Grabowski in my head now.
Yeah. And Lenin said something like, "I'm going to make having sex as common as drinking water." And what he meant was, the way you have to destroy the family because it's its own little thing, and it has to be destroyed so the state rules. And the way to do that is just give men sex anywhere they want it. Then they don't have any reason to be married anymore. And then you take away the raising of the kids. The government does that,
Right.
And there's nothing left besides you and the government.
And that's why I think the sex in Brave New World, though, makes your stomach turn, makes much more sense than the sex in 1984. And this was Lewis wrote a review of 1984 and said he said that Animal Farm was better because it didn't have this weird view against like a puritanical sex, because it seemed like George Orwell's view of sex didn't really fit in there, didn't really fit as much. But in Brave New World, it makes total sense because exactly what you said. And then this woman gets pregnant by one of the leaders in Brave New World, and she actually gives birth naturally, and that's disgusting. That's this gross thing. It's not pure. It's not hermetically sealed. And she gives a birth to this child who's then raised on old books, and he's thought of as a savage, but he's a thinker. He's an old school thinker.
Yeah, and he eventually gets involved in one of these orgies, right? And
the worst.
And suicide.
Yeah.
So, I mean, think about the music and the imagery we have right now. I noticed that sometimes you'll see movies that will supposedly be about high school, but the actresses are hired, they're in their 20s.
Yeah,
right. So it's not illegal for them to be very sexual, whereas if it was actually a 15-year-old, it'd be shocking. But they're playing a 15 to 17-year-old.
Well, there was a Netflix show about, young girls, and they were young girls, and they're getting in all sorts of trouble. Thank God because of that.
I
Yeah.
remember that. Yeah. I didn't look into it, but I remember reading about that. But so, yeah, the dehumanizing of sex and replacing it with something else like soma. There's something that's getting there about human nature. What these guys are noticing is that quote I read from 1984. They're noticing breaking apart the creation and trying to put it back together in your own way. But they themselves didn't have knowledge, and so they're not able to give a really tight response to it. I don't know if you've ever seen like one of the Gracies do a triangle. It's tight.
Yeah.
That guy's done. And that's what a good argument should be like. When that argument comes on and you clamp down, there's no breathing. You're done. You just tap. You might not even have time to tap before you're out.
Right. Yeah.
So I don't see that so far in these two we've gone over. I see descriptions that are disturbing, but that might be what Orwell was getting at about propaganda, which is a lot of art, 20th century to the present, is meant to kind of shock you into doing what the artist thinks is a political cause.
Yes.
That's not the same as art. So he'd be right if he said lots of art in our time is propaganda.
Yeah.
Or he might have meant this, that all art is based on a view of reality. That's true too. Art does communicate things about objective reality. And so some people, if they get it wrong, their art will get it wrong too.
Yeah.
And so it almost sounds like he's going so far as to say there's not a fact of the matter. Yeah. But these books resonate because we don't want to live in that kind of place. We recognize at some level it'd be wrong to live my life on soma. But we don't have an argument really in response. And so what's popular right now is to legalize it, right? Mm-hmm. Just have more ways that you can numb the pain.
Yeah.
So we haven't had an argument. We wrote these books 60 years ago. And where are we at?
Well, they strike a chord with us so much. Do you think the reason that they have lasted, even, I mean, I don't know how many people are forced to read them. I read them both of my own accord. I think I was assigned Animal Farm when I was younger. I know I was, but the other two I haven't read until I was an adult. But people still talk about them. Do you think that's because they actually did understand something, even if they didn't understand it enough to have a solution? Or is it just because we're afraid to live in that kind of society that they depict?
Yeah, it's probably a little bit of both. Think about how many dystopian books came out in the last 15 years. And if you'd read these first, especially the 1984 and Brave New World, like this Divergent series.
Yeah, I've heard of that.
And each there's different groups in society. It's almost a direct copy of Brave New World's groups, right?
Yeah.
I mean, they might have like a lawsuit going on with the family of Aldous Huxley. How about Hunger Games?
Districts and
you have districts that are pitted against each other.
Right? Is there war in Hunger Games all the time?
Well, I think they ended another war, created this one, and then to avoid a war like that, they divide the people up and they tell the groups that the other groups have wronged you.
Yeah, that's like 1984, right? They're always changing sides, who they're at war against. We've always been at war against these guys or those guys. Yeah.
Yeah. So it keeps you distracted and then gives you heroes to speak about. So I think there's something there where it's sort of like, well, this is getting at something. Yeah. It's almost like we recognize if we don't have a foundation, we're going to topple.
Yes. Yeah.
But we don't know how to get a foundation in place.
And if anyone else says they have one, then screw you. I'm going to freak out at you.
Yeah.
You don't get to tell me about a foundation.
Yeah. Well, I'm thinking here especially of Hebrews, the end of Hebrews 5 and beginning of 6. When you should have been mature, you're still a baby drinking milk.
You should have been.
Foundational truths in place. And then look at what Paul lists. A lot of those are things that would still stump seminary students now. But those are elementary truths, he calls them. Remember Sherlock Holmes? How do you do it? Elementary. Right? Yeah. These truths that Paul lists are elementary, right? And they're not seminary level, in other words. Yeah. Therefore, Room 101 theology, right? Theology 101.
Yeah.
So, yeah, we don't have a foundation in place. Christians don't. And they're easily manipulated and they lose what they had.
Well, okay, so I think you're right about the non-cognitive answer in 1984, and I want to push back. I think you're still right here, but I can imagine someone saying, "Well, seems like Huxley has this emphasis on reading and being in educating yourself," because he says, we want to produce consumers, and if you're sitting around reading all the time, then you won't be a good consumer. You won't consume much. And then I think at the end they have a secret island kind of place where the thinkers go. If you do want to talk, you're not cool just having orgies and drinking soma. So is is Huxley trying to go for a cognitivist
Yeah.
approach and he's just failing, or
I think it's
is
a
that
really good question, because what it reminds me of is persons who come to see something beautiful in the classical education
yeah,
and the tradition with it. Again, but seeing it's beautiful is the non-cognitive thing, and they can't really make a case for it. They might say things like, "You should learn Latin." Why? It's a dead language. Well, it helps you learn math, and it helps you learn the roots of our other words. Well, why don't I just learn the roots of those other words then? So they'll give arguments, and usually it comes down to, if you pay attention to the kinds of arguments, a non-cognitive thing. This is beautiful, and modern education's ugly. This is what
yeah.
you'll get in Lewis a lot.
Ooh, that's so good. I think that's right, because we have this idea of like there's another meme going around about ditch the man cave and go back to the study, and it says beautiful, rich mahogany, all these books, and everything's
Yeah,
in their place. You got a nice pipe, and it looks really beautiful. But
yeah,
all the guys resonate with that. It's like, how many books did you read last year, though, bro? Like,
I know. Well,
I-
that'll they do a list. They'll say, "I read 365 books last year."
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Competition about.
But yeah,
Think about Mr. Bennett from Pride and Prejudice, the father of Elizabeth, and that's what he does all the time. He sits around reading. So he's read a lot of stuff, but his family's a train wreck. You got Lydia in big trouble. You got the other daughters not knowing who to marry. So yeah, you could read a lot. You could know a lot of what the classical people said. I have this picture. I tell my students, I'm going to show you something really scary. You might like scary movies, but this one's going to give you nightmares. And I'll put a picture up. It's a black and white kind of cartoon of an Oxford Don. And he's got spectacles, and he has an Oxford robe on, and he has a copy of Plato. Like, isn't that terrifying? And the point I'm making is, yeah, that didn't get us anywhere. We tried that, and that got us to Platonism, which isn't true. Platonism denies God the creator.
yeah. Dang, because that's not. Yeah, that is shocking. You're propagandizing me right now. No, that is shocking because I
That
love
was
Lewis, right?
my rear naked.
Well, I think of that, right? Because I'm still drawn by that same picture of, yeah, let me have like a old three-piece suit, and let me get some little things on my elbows there, and it is more like the there's something about it that makes you feel good, makes you
Yeah.
feel sophisticated and smart.
Yeah, certain personalities, like some personalities, they'll want to be the kind of person where if you say who's the best quarterback, they know the answer and all the statistics to back it up. And other people want this. You say, hey, what did Plato say in part 3 of book 9? Oh, I actually memorized that. Let me tell you what he said.
The same personality, yeah, it just carries over.
So yeah,
Okay,
well,
so
in other words, neither one of those getting to knowledge.
yeah. And so, although it might appear that Huxley's answer is we need to be educating ourselves, and would seem a cognitivist answer, he's probably doing that, or he'd maybe be betraying that he's not doing that throughout the book, in that it's appearance only, because
Yeah,
he
in other
doesn't
words,
have the
there was a beautiful past,
yeah.
and there's a kind of nostalgia for the past. Lewis has this also. But and I get the Tolkien does, like the elves just live off the past,
Mhm.
right?
And they're the good guys, yeah.
And it's so bad in the present that they have to all leave, right? So when you get pushed, though, here's the problem: the present is the baby of the past.
Mhm.
The past was so great. How did we end up here?
Such a good that's I hate that, but you're right. Like, yeah, if these Oxford Dons were messiah figures, then why are we where we're at? Well, we didn't do what they said enough. Well, I don't know, man.
Yeah,
If they
you
were
always
so
get mad
good.
at that. You haven't tried communism yet.
Yeah,
You have to
yeah,
wait and
yeah.
try it.
Right.
Well, so now I'm not saying nothing true was ever spoken of in the past.
Right.
I'm speaking to the romantic movement of the past, which says that was beautiful, this is ugly, and
Turn
saying
back
that's
to
not going to be enough.
yeah, that's good.
So now think about, let me give you some examples from that hideous strength. Now, one thing, here's something I'll point out there. So the other two I'll call secular, not because those guys weren't religious in any respect, but because nothing like that comes up in the book. But here we'll have Lewis, and what he's kind of putting in there new is you're going to have essentially angels and demons involved. And so I know there's a big movement now to re-enchant the world. And they'll think, yes, Lewis is re-enchanting. Well, what we really need, here's the problem with stories in 1984 is they don't have enough angels and demons in them.
Yeah.
Now, I'm not opposed necessarily to this. I mean, in scripture, there's sometimes angels, but they're given a relatively minor role compared to God.
Yeah.
Whereas the Gnostic worldview reverses that. There is a fellow named God who started things off, but you should interact with the local spirits and angels, and they're the ones that have power. And if you're sick, do something about it with them. So the Christians can easily kind of adopt that attitude.
Yeah.
Whereas we see, and then these angels become the ones who create, and we don't see anything like that attributed to them. In the Psalms, it's always God created this. God acted in history. God did this. So I'm not opposed to that in Lewis, but I'd like to suggest that Milton does it better. And in Paradise Lost, I know Lewis liked Paradise Lost. You have the Parliament of the Demons trying to decide what they're going to do, and you have the backstory of the fall of Satan and his temptation. He has this great discussion where he's trying to tempt the other angels to join him, and part of what he says is the same thing that he ends up saying to Adam and Eve. We can be gods. I don't remember being created. I might have existed from eternity. So the essence of the problem is not seeing what's clear, the eternal power of God, and attributing that to something else.
Yeah.
That's even going on for Satan. And then he does that with Adam and Eve, and they don't know it. Yeah. So let me read a couple. I got a couple quotes from the.
While you're looking for that, I want to show everyone this OG cover is like my favorite. I don't read this one. This is just one that I like, but it's it's this one might be later. This might be 70s. It doesn't look like it's 40s.
Let's see when this one is.
40s. Oh yeah, this is 65 or 77, one of those. And you could tell it's got that like trippy 70s vibe going on there.
I'm trying to see, when was this one I have? Mine is this one.
Yeah, I've got that picture on this guy. Yeah.
Yeah, the one you have there looks like an updated version, because the only date I have in here is 1946.
Yeah. I wonder when that covers from.
Lewis's preface is from 43, so this might be one from 46. My dad got this when he was young, and then I ended up with it. All right, so let me find these here. You probably saw this one, right? McGregor losing the other day.
That's the best. Yeah. That's yeah. I think that's from his loss a couple years back, but
well, I was just joking that as if that was the fight the other day.
Okay.
All right. Now, do you want to talk at all about it while I zero in on this?
Yeah. So this is, I think, I like this book so much because I didn't know about it for so long, and then I read it, and I think he's finding some things that do come true. I think he's seeing the poison of subjectivism, the turn towards postmodernism. There's this quote on page 200. It says, "Despair of objective truth had been increasingly insinuated into the sciences. Indifference to it and a concentration upon mere power had been the result." And I mean, that's another thing that comes out in the other books as well, is subjectivism, despair of objective truth, or indifference to it, and then this concentration onto power, because there is no objective essences, there are no natures, there is
Yeah.
no. So if there is none, then we have Nietzsche's super, Ubermensch, Superman, and he comes along and he's going to save us, and he ends up putting his boot on your face forever.
Yeah, the will to power is the but let's think through this, because what you said, I'm personally inclined to like that. I mean, I like truth and objective natures, but does my liking them and preferring them amount to an argument? Like, what
No.
would the argument be for truth?
Yeah. Well, yeah. So I think truth is pretty much inescapable because it coheres to the reality we live in. So I think you can deny it with your words, but I don't think you can deny it with your life. You know what I
Just
mean? Like,
the livability test, integrity, live what you're professing.
yeah.
There's something to that, but we were talking about Grand Priest earlier and Nagarjuna, another philosopher, Hindu philosopher that he follows is Shankara. And what he said was that reason and the mind are like an elephant struggling in deep mud. You can construct your theory and someone else will construct theirs and you'll argue about it. Both of them have strengths and weaknesses. And that's all it comes to. The highest philosophy is silence, being able to overcome those dichotomies of reality. You'll see hints of later on what Hegel does. Anytime there's a monist, they end up saying the same thing. Reality is one, it divides into two, which then become one. Unfortunately, that is what they do in probably the best show out there right now, Cobra Kai.
Okay.
Right? You'll have the two sides, John Kreese and Mr. Miyagi. And their two schools produce Johnny and Daniel. Reversed. Dan Downs with Miyagi, Johnny. And they represent the two sides of the yin and yang. And at the end of the last, wait, this won't be a spoiler, will it?
It might be. I don't know. I haven't seen it, but you could spoil away.
So yeah, at the end of the last one, that they team up. The two become one to become able to, and that's Star Wars. That's the original idea of Star Wars.
Right? You order and chaos, and
so about that, thought is just a kind of a byproduct. I remember I had this discussion in the faculty dining hall of Christ Church, Oxford, with another philosopher who said thoughts are just our self-justifications to ourselves of what we do.
Yeah. Can you just turn that on itself right there?
You can, but he would say it doesn't matter. That's just you making yourself feel better about your philosophy. Yeah. So this is like a philosophy of life. This is more like, we might paint it as a really ugly subjectivism, but a better picture would be the picture of Emerson and Walt Whitman and getting involved in the beauty and reality of life. Mm. So I think we're going to have to do more than just, it's either will to power and subjectivism or there's objective truth.
Yeah. Well, okay. So in that hideous strength, there's his version of the objective room, or sorry, it's called the objective room. It's his version of room 101, and you're not tortured. Well, you are tortured, but you're tortured in that they're asking you to do these random things, to go touch this, to go touch that, and things are helter skelter. They're off key, they're off kilter, whatever. And it's like this picture. Like you try to look at that thing, and it's like, are you seeing a face? Well, no, because there's a third hole in the middle. Oh, maybe is that like the third eye and the mouth is. No, it doesn't mean anything.
Yeah.
You're trying to find this meaning here, and it's messing with your mind. It's psychological torture, trying to break down your concepts of objective reality.
So yeah, right. So let's work with that. Your concepts are as arbitrary as the other concepts, and to get you to see that, we have to break you down. It's like that quote I gave from 1984: "Break your mind into pieces and then rebuild it."
Right. Yep.
So it's all arbitrary. Christianity in that tradition, arbitrary. That's one of the problems that comes up when people say, let's return to the beautiful tradition. Well, it might surprise you, but there's other beautiful traditions in world history. Very impressive traditions that could rival and perhaps beat the Greek tradition. So how do we know which one to go back to? Why this Western one? Without just being arbitrary, it just comes down to I like it.
Without an argument. Yeah, it's just down to your non-cognitive
And
emotional.
and then it becomes kind of an ad hominem, and yours ends up in ugly stuff. What's wrong with Sauron? He's ugly.
Yeah.
Imagine if the orcs got to write the story. What would the elves look like?
Yeah.
Lazy bums.
Yeah. Pointy-eared. Yeah.
Yeah,
Well, I think maybe
the elves aren't doing anything. They're just lazy. The orcs are very industrious. You never see an orc on a break.
he's always got an axe in hand chopping at something.
They're working. They're hard working. They're taking orders. They're working together.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that's another kind of perspectivalism. So I know Lewis wants to escape that, but what has he given us that will get us out of it? We already come into it agreeing with him.
Yeah.
So that's why I might be like, yeah, this is right. This is really bad.
Interesting. So for you, so at least in the Abolition of Man, in the 4th chapter, Lewis goes in on what he calls the Tao, and we talked a little bit about this, but it's an objective morality.
Yeah, good. That's what
And I can't remember. I should know this better. If he goes to that in that hideous strength, he should, because this is like the novelization of that. Is what would you say?
Here it is. This is exactly. I'm glad you're on the same page as me. In my book, it's 293. Merlin's talking.
Merlin.
And let me read this. He says, there were tales in my day of some. Wait, no, I'll go back. A thought occurs into my mind, and I do not know whether it is good or evil. But because I am the high council of Logres, I have. It's got blurry right there. I have awaked. If all this west part of the world is apostate, might it not be lawful in our great need to look further beyond Christendom? Should we not find some even among the heathen who are not wholly corrupt? There were tales in my day of some such, men who knew not the articles of our most holy faith, but who worshipped God as they could and acknowledged the law of nature. All right, this is Lewis. I think this puts a finger very close. If we have this and non-cognitivism, together we have Lewis. The problem with men is they don't have chests. Men without chests. They need feelings back. They have their mind and their feet, which is what does things. So Lewis identifies reason as one of the problems. I would say what he means by that here is instrumental reason or mathematical reasoning. Not the way I was using it earlier was reason itself, what helps us think, what makes it the ability to think. So you have humans and they can calculate and they can do things, but they've lost their feelings. And if we just restored feelings, men with chests, then things would be set right. And there must be some of these somewhere else.
Okay.
I think about that guy in the last battle who they meet in heaven. Right, who was a worshiper of Tishrok, but he worshipped him as if he was Aslan, so he's all right now. So here's where the Tao comes short in Lewis's thought. They're partly corrupt, but not wholly. They don't know about the faith, but they worship God as they could. Well, hold on. If they worship God as they could, they're not without excuse. And they don't need the Christian faith, which is about redemption from not knowing God as you should have.
Yeah.
So which one is it?
Yeah, and I wonder, because he had to bring in Merlin. Merlin's in like a grave in Logres, and they have to. Merlin ends up like being the savior because he's not. Is it because he hasn't been corrupted by the modern turn towards the self?
Like it's an appeal to tradition, right? This magical sense of tradition.
Yeah.
The
Literally,
modern mind wants to learn about a pearl, so it crushes the pearl into its powder to study it, and it ruins the pearl. The medieval mind just saw the beauty of the pearl and didn't have to crush it the way the scientific mind does. You just appreciate there's magic in the world. I don't know how these things happen. They're just magic, and you just love it.
Yeah. Okay. Well, okay.
It's non-cognitive, and it forgets. What's the recent Steven Pinker book about Enlightenment Now or something? And he goes over, and he's right. My goodness, we've done a lot of impressive stuff. I just think by coming to know the nature of the world. I think that's actually, I don't think he means it this way, but I think he's given some pretty strong arguments for God's existence in there.
Yeah.
I wouldn't want to return to the medieval ages. There's the distinctive thing of the medieval ages was the bubonic plague. That's not even a threat to Parker now.
Right.
It's not on Parker's radar of concerns.
But every now and then I do think about it, actually, because there's a pet shop. I love pets and animals. There's a pet shop that has prairie dogs, and I guess prairie dogs have the bubonic plague, so I do think about it here and there. But
what I mean is, even if you got it, they'll cure you.
I still go to the pet shop, right? Yeah, I don't avoid it like the plague, like I should.
All right, so wait a minute. This is in Lewis in a number of places. The Tao people, there's a vague sense that everyone has. He's reading Paul this way in Romans 1 and 2. I know this is completely opposite of what Paul's saying. There's some vague sense that even the Gentiles have, and then it's made clearer for us in Scripture. And by the way, this is how Dante handles the stage of limbo. Adam, Abraham, Socrates, they're all in limbo because they had some vague sense of God, but they didn't yet have the Christian scriptures. Yeah. Well, wait a minute. That's not what's being said in Romans 1 and 2 at all.
Yeah, without excuse.
The eternal power and divine nature are clear. That's a lot. And I don't see any of these other world religions affirming the eternal power and divine nature, but they should have.
Yeah. Well, again, back to your culpability. I forgot what it's called. It's like you're culpable for not knowing. What do you call it? Ignorance. Culpable ignorance. That's right.
That's what I said earlier. Stephen does in his speech in Acts 7.
But Romans 1 says they've been clearly perceived, and so you would say that they've been clearly perceived by someone in the past, but that we've lost it, and now we're still culpably.
Yeah, I think in that section he's giving a history of the human race. They were clearly perceived. Now we've exchanged, because he also says they're exchanged. So how can you have both those at the same time? So he's describing what's happened to us, and now we're at that stage where we've exchanged them for idols. We call something else eternal.
That's what Lewis might be going with, that, right? Like he might say in the past, before this turn, well, Romans was written way before.
Yeah, I think that's Adam. I don't think that doesn't survive the fall, past the fall. But here's the thing. We don't need to go to Romans. Like someone could say, oh, you're just assuming scripture. I'm using that not as a proof text, but to illustrate the point. Lewis has a very bare view of natural theology. And I don't think it'll be enough to get us where we need to go to overcome these dystopias.
Well, so here's, I want to push back again just to see where we're at. Lewis, one of his laments is that the modern man has separated practical reasoning from theoretical reasoning. And he says, you might be surprised by this, but ethics used to be called practical reasoning. It was under the category of reason. Yeah. And so it seems like in Abolition of Man, what he's lamenting there is that this subjectivism and this turn to the self has disordered your relation to the good. And you ought to feel this way because it's morally right to feel this way. And that's what the old school education was supposed to do. Maybe looking at Aristotle, and you're supposed to be attuning yourself to feel a certain way. So, he talks about the waterfall, and he's going over this old debate, whether it's sublime or whether it's beautiful or pretty, right? And he's saying, no, it's objectively sublime. You should feel this way, but not maybe because just for feeling's sake, but because your feelings ought to be guided by your reason as well. Sure.
That's a great summary. Let's work with it. And then think about why this dystopia comes up and what the implied solution is. Because of the three of them, probably Lewis is the more preachy.
Yeah.
Fictional works.
Yeah, I think so.
I think that's probably why it doesn't survive as well as fiction. It's obvious the author wants you to move a certain direction.
Yeah. Okay.
All three of these are. I mean, these are probably all C-level novels. Not, they're not like up there with Dostoevsky or something.
Okay. Yeah. They're
not Dickens or Shakespeare. And that's partly because the authors are kind of telling us what we're supposed to think.
Real quick, if I could say with that, is that a function of the genre of dystopia, or is there like do you have an A-list dystopian novel that you think's the best?
Yeah, good question. Let me think about that. I don't think it's necessarily a function of it, but it's like with Animal Farm. He's trying to tell you something, right? Yeah. literature is showing, not telling. Philosophy essay, you tell people what you're supposed to think. In literature, you show them. So when it starts to be more like it's basically an allegorical story teaching you something, then it's no longer in the area of literature.
Okay. So then maybe for me, like one of my favorite books is Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep, Philip K. Dick. And in that,
Are showing in that one.
yeah, exactly. That's what I'm thinking. It's a dystopian novel still, but you can, a lot of people argue different things about what he was really trying to say. Is he trying to say this or that? Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, well,
That's
being confused, like some philosophers think the more confusing them, the more it takes people to talk about what I really mean, the better I've done.
yeah.
That may or may not, but I think that he is doing more. Just like he's just showing us an idea of a future that doesn't seem to be one we'd want.
Yeah. Okay. That's good. That's good criteria. I like that. It's helpful.
So, oh yeah, what you just said about education is exactly right. What we were talking about earlier in Brave New World and going back to a traditional education.
Yeah. Right.
This will help you perceive beauty. Think about how circular this is. If you have the right education, you perceive beauty. Well, why should I want to perceive beauty? Because that shows you had the right education. You're calling it beauty. I don't see it. And I'm supposed to take your word for it that if I'd had the right education, I would see this as sublime.
Well, what if you were to say the right education would properly orient you to view reality as you should, or as it's meant to be seen?
That's true by definition, right? That doesn't get us anywhere. That doesn't help adjudicate between contenders.
Well, you could say this one helps you see reality as it should, and this one doesn't.
But then you've set up some criterion by which you're judging them, which at least in this case is within one of them.
Okay.
So the other guy will say foul, right? Well, you pinned me for 3 seconds on my back and you called it over, but I wasn't wrestling. I was doing jujitsu.
Yeah.
So you can't say you won. You didn't win.
So then would you say you need to go into their conception and like perform a reductio, or how are we adjudicating then?
Yeah, I would. I'm going to use to illustrate again, not as a proof text, but illustrate John chapter 1 verses 1 through 5. But let me get there from what you just said.
Yep.
You see how Lewis's thing about sublime is the non-cognitive.
Mm-hmm.
If you have the right education, you'd be appeared to correctly. You'd get it. You'd feel, because sublime is not something you can write an essay about. That's one of his points. If they give the little kid in his education and say a blank paper, say, here, write about the sublime. That's not what you do with the sublime. You're just struck by it.
Yeah.
So again, it's this non-cognitive stuff.
Okay.
Now, there is a non-cognitive part of life. I'm not saying there isn't, but it comes after the foundational truths are in place.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe you could say what you just said a moment ago a little bit differently. If you had the foundation in place, then you'd understand, including your non-cognitive aspects, reality correctly. But just saying that doesn't get it there. And the appeal to the Tao is too vague to get us there.
Yeah.
We can have a robust and thick, it's not a robust and thick, I guess that's an ambiguous term nowadays, a robust and substantial natural theology that shows the eternal power and divine nature of God. Or you knew this was on the way soon.
Yep.
Chapter 21. Look what this says. Why didn't Lewis read this? Chapter 21 on religious worship and the Sabbath day. The light of nature shows. So this is just the light of nature, that there is a God who has lordship and sovereignty over all, is good and does good unto all, and therefore is to be feared, loved, praised, called upon, trusted in, and served with all the heart, and with all the soul, and with all the might. So Merlin's saying there's some people who did that to some extent.
Yeah.
I think historical Christianity and Paul are saying, no one seeks God.
Yeah.
No one does what is right.
Yeah.
So we need more than a vague Tao.
And a return to the past. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's because we had only a vague Tao that we're in the problems that we're in right now. So just going back to it's not going to solve any problems.
Okay. So I think that's probably right. I think that's probably a deficiency in Lewis's answer, though. I think the way he's pointing out, I love the objective room because it seems so pertinent to today of say this about this, point here, point here. I think there's a point where he's supposed to step on the cross maybe. And that was when Mark Studdock was like, wait, huh? Like, why would you have me step on it if it was fake? If it didn't mean anything, why would I step on it? Oh, because it's part of your culture.
It
And that
means
kind of
something
woke
to
him up.
you.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think that's really. I think there's. So you were asking that earlier. So what do we do? And I haven't really, I guess, given an answer myself. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness does not comprehend it. The word is inescapable, and you hinted at this earlier when you went to the integrity test. The word is ultimately inescapable, so that you can't finally silence it. It will always be there, revealing God. And that's why the response to Stephen is just fury, gnashing your teeth and killing him, because you can't actually get rid of that witness. So the word reveals who God is. If we want to respond to the deficiencies in these dystopias, we should be able to show who God is and how that is a life full of meaning. So yes, it's true you've lost meaning, but here's why, and here's what to do about it.
Yeah.
It's not a vague natural theology. It's full and clear. And it's because humans did that we now need redemption through Christ.
Yeah.
So I think replacing that, otherwise you get in a situation where it's like, do they need Christ? Like the people in limbo don't need Christ, I guess.
Well, okay, so let's go. Maybe we can go one by one. So 1984, in talking to Weston, uh, no, Winston. Winston's from the Space Trilogy. So in talking to Winston, and maybe you got his ear, you're going to counsel him, and you say, "Here's what you should do next time O'Brien comes to you, and he's going to bring you to room 101. Here's what you do." Um, do you say give him a healthy dose of natural theology? Do you say preach the gospel to him? Like what do you think? How is he
Yeah.
disproving? Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. So let's think about this kind of thought experiment. You'll say, just answer it. But I'm going to do a meta thing and think about the thought experiment, because you'll see that about now, right? So what would you do? Should I write a letter to my congressperson and tell them this or that? What I've done is a little bit differently. I'm diagnosing how you got here.
Yeah.
And that happened. We'll connect this back up to the beginning. We're talking about jujitsu analogies and philosophy, right? He's got your arm isolated, and at 160 degrees, you're almost to 180. How did you get here? So you might say, what do I do? How do I avoid the armbar? Well, I have some suggestions for that. But what on earth did you do to get in this situation? Here's the first thing you do. Don't get in that situation. Yeah. So you were a fideist. You lost what you had. And remember, Christ says that even what you have will be taken from you. And now you're maybe panicking and you want to know what to do. Well, go back to the elementary truths for yourself, not just so you can convince O'Brien.
Yeah.
But you don't have them in place.
Yeah.
And you know what? There's been people, you might say, but then I'll suffer a lot. Yeah, you could read about the life of Solzhenitsyn, and he suffered a lot. You could read about the life of Paul, and he suffered a lot.
Yeah.
And sometimes suffering helps people focus their attention. John Bunyan wrote Pilgrim's Progress in prison. Right. So I don't have a solution to how to avoid suffering when a tyranny has come upon you because you neglected what you should have been doing. But I have that solution for you of what to do. Get the foundation in place.
Yeah. Okay.
I don't know that O'Brien's open to discussion.
Yeah.
Right. Pilate wasn't.
Yeah. Right. What is truth? So
if Jesus had just been, someone could say, if he just had spoken better, to Pilate, he would have avoided it. He's like, no. I mean, some people, the light shines in the darkness comprehends it not. Now, let me read you one more thing from Idiot's Strength. He says, this is Strake. God will have power to give eternal reward and eternal punishment. God, said Mark, how does he come into it? I don't believe in God. But, my friend, said Philostrato, does it follow that because there was no God in the past, there will be no God in the future also? Don't you see, said Strake, that we are offering you the unspeakable glory of being present at the creation of God Almighty. Here, in this house, you shall meet the first sketch of the real God. It is a man, or a being made by man, who will finally ascend the throne of the universe and rule forever. So I think this is getting to that same thread of temptation we saw in all of these books. You can be as God. Now think of the absurdity of this. The first property of God is that God's eternal, the eternal power of God. God had no beginning. That's why it's absurd to say you could become God.
Yeah.
Well, I had a beginning. I can't become God. And that's what's going on here, the same absurdity. You can't make something that had no beginning. So you get to the absurdity, the self-contradiction, the meaninglessness of unbelief. And that's where I think people can't stand that. When their meaninglessness is exposed, it infuriates them.
Hmm.
So that would be something you could do with any of these bad guy characters. Expose the meaninglessness of what they're doing. And I didn't see any arguments in these that did that. Responding back and saying, well, you're going to lose beauty.
Yeah.
Doesn't expose the meaninglessness of it. Because maybe someone will be willing to sacrifice beauty to get to a goal they think is better.
Yeah. Well, we would do that, right? Like we're not just driven by beauty. Like if I get scarred up and stuff for the sake of Christ, I'll do that because it's not just about beauty. I like beauty, but there's truth wins out when it's in conflict.
Yeah. What appears to be beautiful and conflict with truth. So they're describing, I think, they're each of them getting to this idea of putting yourself in the place of God. And I think that is the fundamental problem from the beginning. But their answers are very typical mid 20th century fideism.
Well, and Lewis's answer partly is Mr. Boltitude, the bear, coming through and running ship on everyone, just destroying all the bad guys.
Yeah.
Which is interesting. Maybe it's nature's revenge kind of thing going on there. But something that struck me just real quick from the quote from That Hideous Strength, it sounds like modern conversation around artificial intelligence, so-called AGI, right? So the singularity point, we're going to create God. And there's tons of great science fiction stories about that, but they think it's actually happening. We will create God.
Yeah.
It's like, dude, read some old science fiction, please. Like, stop doing that.
Well, that's what's kind of funny, I think, with pop culture. I mentioned earlier Sam and Dean, and they end up deposing God and replacing God with Lucifer's son. Right? Not the son of God, but the son of Lucifer ends up ruling the world. And that's supposed to be a good thing. So, yeah, I think there's the need for meaning. This is the sense in which you can't erase the logos. It says the logos is the light of man. It's our life in verse 1:4.
Yeah.
The logos is the life and the light of man. You can't erase that in yourself. You want meaning. So Shankara or Nagarjuna are both explaining to you their philosophies. And that gets back to your integrity test. If you had integrity, why does it matter that you can or can't explain your move to silence? Just be silent. And that's ultimately what nirvana is. It's not people think nirvana is like a heaven place or they think it's really bad music. It's non-being.
Yeah.
So the opposite of the word is non-being. Being as a creation of God reveals God, and it's our obligation to show that. And the alternative is negations, non-being. So how well can we do to show that? I'm putting that as a challenge to ourselves, to you and me, and to the audience. We got to where we're at because we were being fideists. And we might not like the direction we see things going, but if you could show me we had the foundation in place and we're still getting into this trouble, then I'm wrong.
Yeah.
So this is testable. This is not just throwing something out there. You can test it. I think what we'll see is we don't have the foundation in place. We're badly divided. We can't even show the fundamental things about God. We think it takes an intense philosophical journal article to get even a small step into showing God's existence. And yeah, so what's the outcome of that? That's not the foundation in place. So when I read these, that's what I see. I see nightmarish stories that you wouldn't want to live in, but the people who live in them don't know what they need to know. That's Socrates, and they should know it. That's Stephen.
That's good. Man, that's good. I always want to make it like, because I feel the weight of what you're saying. And so maybe for the listeners, like, what do I do then? So can you just reiterate again for us? Like, what do you think? So we should get that foundation in place, but how might someone go about setting up that foundation for themselves. If they've been a fideist in the past, they've just kind of taken things on blind faith, or how would they go about getting right so that when it's their turn, they're not
Yeah. Well,
silent?
since you and I are in philosophy, we might use philosophy terms. I'm going to describe this without trying my best not to do that, just because I think any Christian can and should do this. Any Christian could be called on in a setting to witness. I think you would have to begin the way that Paul begins, which is with the clarity of general revelation. Challenge yourself to be able to show what's clear about the eternal power and divine nature of God. That requires doing two things: that positive work, but also the negative work of knowing what are the other views. A lot of what these authors do, a lot of times C.S. Lewis and others narrow it down to there's just materialists or Christian theism. And that's simply not accurate. And what happens then is you'll get someone will read Aristotle and think, well, he gave an argument for God's existence. He's on our side. They don't know, well, that's a third view. That's called Greek dualism. He also denies God the creator. It's not just materialists and Christian theists. So become familiar with what are the challenges that have been raised up against the knowledge of God.
Yeah.
And be ready to demolish them. And that's going to take some commitment to being mentored. So find a mentor. That's something that I do.
Yeah.
I'm available to be mentoring you, helping you grow through those things. And because of the internet, you don't have to move and go to ASU. You can just be mentored on a Zoom meeting. But find a mentor. It's like if someone said, man, I saw a purple belt in jiu-jitsu. He was great. How do I do that? Well, you're not going to get it by reading a book, probably. You're going to have to be someone who knows what they're doing will have to help you do that.
Yeah.
So find a mentor. And that might be part of the problem. You might say, yeah, all my mentors say you just have to start with God. Everyone believes God deep down. Well, you're not going to be able to respond to challenges then. Find someone who can help you see what's clear about God in general revelation.
Yeah. Man, that's good. That's helpful. This is good as always, man. Challenging and fun.
Time flies, right?
It does. Yeah, it's an hour and 40 in. That was compelling, and I'm excited about it, man. I'm excited to do this myself, to be thinking through my own reasons, to be checking my foundations, to be trying to apply this to everyday life, and what we see in the news. Not everything's gonna, it's not an allegory for America in 2021, but yeah, man, totalitarianism is always around the corner in every generation. Fideism is always around, just with the siren call, and yeah, to be on guard, to be fighting that, to be knowing what you believe and why you believe it.
Yeah. Well, and I don't know how it works with giving out information for contacting, but I'm sure we can make it possible so people can be in touch if they want to go further.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, people can leave a comment or something, and we can get you in touch. Definitely.
Yeah.
That'd be awesome. Well, man, thanks so much. This has been huge. We covered a ton. I can't wait till our next one. I don't know what it's going to be yet, but I'm excited for it because I always learn so much, and I love just being able to talk through this stuff with someone who's so learned.
Same here. Well, what'll be a lot of fun is this. Sometime our paths will cross in the physical world, and we'll get to roll, and we can film that. We can film that and put that up. And I have no doubt you'll win because you have more of a wrestling background than I do. But it will just be a lot of fun. And then we can have the rolling edition of Parker and Anderson.
That'd be so good. Yeah, rolling with Anderson. Yeah, that'd be great.
Right.
All right. Well, we could talk about this more, and Lord willing, we're going to someday soon. But for now, it's going to have to do it. This has been Parker's Pensées, and as always, all